Ethan Vance had seen trouble before. As a senior security officer aboard Helios 3, a bustling, human-controlled space station at the edge of neutral Sector 47, he had broken up smuggling rings, defused hostage situations, and even wrestled a cybernetically enhanced mercenary into an airlock once. But none of that compared to the trouble currently seated at the dimly lit corner of Portside Bar, a Zyrelian assassin in a tattered cloak, watching him with unblinking silver eyes. His fingers tensed near his sidearm as he took another sip of his drink, pretending not to notice her. He'd been trained to recognize high-threat individuals, and Zyrelians topped that list. They weren't just killers, they were perfect killers, designed by their own genetics to be the ultimate predators. Their senses outmatched any humans, their reflexes were beyond instant, and their reputation? Ruthless. So why was one of them staring at him like she needed help? Before he could decide whether to make a move or call reinforcements, the Zyrelian woman stood up. The motion was impossibly fluid, predatory yet effortless, like a shadow shifting. Her hood slid back just enough to reveal her sharp, elegant features, black skin that shimmered faintly under the neon bar lights, high cheekbones, and those silver, slit-pupiled eyes that marked her as a purebred assassin. She strode toward him. Ethan didn't flinch, but his body went rigid with anticipation. He noted every possible escape route, every angle of attack. The woman stopped a foot away. When she spoke, her voice was smooth, low, and oddly tired. "You're the only one who can save me." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "I doubt that." The Zyrelian glanced over her shoulder, scanning the room in a way that made his instincts spike. Something was hunting her. That didn't happen. Zyrelians didn't get hunted, they were the hunters. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Start talking." She hesitated, then slid into the seat across from him. "My name is Rax. I was part of the Omega Directive." Ethan's gut twisted. The Omega Directive was a whispered legend among Black Ops circles, a ruthless, off-the-books organization that deployed elite assassins to shape galactic events from the shadows. No official records existed, but everyone knew the bodies they left behind. Ethan kept his expression neutral. "If that's true, why are you still breathing?" "Because I did the one thing they don't tolerate," Rax murmured. "I refused an order." She reached into her cloak. Ethan's hand twitched toward his gun, but she merely pulled out a small hollow disc. She placed it on the table, tapping its surface. A miniature projection flickered to life, classified mission briefings, tactical plans, names of targets, encrypted messages. One name leaped out at him. Governor Elias Moreau. Ethan clenched his jaw. Moreau was the chief administrator of Helios 3, and while he was no saint, he was the reason the station hadn't collapsed into crime and anarchy. If someone wanted him dead, Rax studied his reaction. "Now you understand why I need you." Ethan shook his head. "No. What I understand is that if the Omega Directive is after you, you're already dead. And if I help you, so am I." Rax leaned forward. "You don't understand. I know their methods. I know their secrets. If you protect me, I can help you dismantle them." Ethan smirked. "You expect me to trust an alien assassin?" Her lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "No. I expect you to want to survive. And right now, I'm your best chance at that." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, and then the bar exploded. The blast ripped through the far wall, sending bodies flying. The shockwave knocked Ethan out of his chair, ears ringing. Before he could react, something fast darted through the smoke. Black armor, glowing red optics, moving with the precision of a machine. Omega Enforcers. One of them spotted him and raised a plasma rifle. Ethan barely had time to register the movement before a silver blur sliced through the Enforcer's throat. Blood splattered as Rax moved like liquid death, her blade an extension of her body. The assassin didn't even hesitate. She twisted midair, kicked off a shattered table, and vanished into the smoke. The next few seconds were a haze of gunfire, screams, and flashing red lights. Ethan ducked behind the bar, gripping his pistol. His mind screamed at him to run, but another part of him, the part that had been in too many firefights to ignore survival instincts, whispered, "She just saved your life." A shadow loomed behind him. Ethan spun, gun raised. Rax caught his wrist. "We need to move." For a moment, their eyes met, hers gleaming with something cold yet pleading. And against every ounce of his better judgment, Ethan Vance made a choice that would change his life forever. He ran with the assassin. Ethan's boots pounded against the metal flooring of Helios 3's lower corridors, his mind racing faster than his feet. Rax moved ahead of him like a ghost, silent, fluid, her black cloak billowing behind her as she navigated the labyrinth of emergency maintenance tunnels. Alarms blared across the station. The Omega Directive wasn't bothering with subtlety anymore. Ethan chanced a look over his shoulder. The attack had left at least a dozen bodies in the bar, and the security feeds would be buzzing with his face alongside Rax's. He had just committed career suicide by choosing to run with an alien assassin. Rax stopped abruptly at a sealed maintenance hatch. She pressed her palm against the scanner. Nothing. Locked. She turned to him, silver eyes burning. Override it. Ethan hesitated. If I do that, they'll know where we're going. They already know. A distant metallic thunk echoed through the tunnel. Pursuers. Cursing, Ethan yanked a security override tool from his belt and jammed it into the access panel. A soft beep, a flicker of light, and the hatch hissed open. Go, he ordered. Rax slipped through first, Ethan right behind her. The moment they were through, he slammed the hatch shut and re-engaged the lockdown. A heartbeat later, gunfire rattled the other side. Sparks flew as bullets and plasma rounds dented the thick metal. Ethan exhaled. Too close. Rax was already moving, leading them into an abandoned docking bay. Ethan knew this sector. It hadn't been used in years after a hull breach rendered it unsafe. Still, the oxygen levels were stable enough for a temporary hideout. She turned to him. We need to leave the station. Ethan narrowed his eyes. You think I have a ship just lying around? Rax studied him. You're security. You have access to impound records. I need something fast, unregistered, and off-grid. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temple. He was really doing this. Pulling out his datapad, he hacked into the impound logs. A few illegal transports, some corporate ships, and bingo, a stealth-class corvette. Unregistered. Seized from a smuggler last month. He glanced at Rax. I can get us to it, but after that, I want answers. She nodded. Then let's not die before you get them. Ethan led them through the maze of docking corridors, his mind running damage control. The Omega Directive would never let Rax escape. If they were willing to hit a public bar just to eliminate her, they'd burn all of Helios, 3 to the ground if necessary. How the hell did I get into this? Rax kept pace beside him, eerily silent. She's not even out of breath. Ethan had seen elite soldiers in action, but nothing like this. Zyrelians weren't just trained killers, they were born for it. His stomach twisted at the realization. What had she done for the Omega Directive? How many people had she killed before she decided to run? A chill crawled down his spine. He wasn't just running with a fugitive. He was running with a weapon. They reached the auxiliary hangars. A single security officer stood watch, a kid, barely in his 20s, checking his comms lazily. Ethan turned to Rax. Let me handle this. She didn't argue. That scared him more than anything. He walked up to the officer, putting on his best, nothing's wrong face. Need you to clear out. Security sweep. The officer frowned. Didn't hear about any. A blur. Before the kid could react, Rax moved. She was behind him in an instant, one hand around his throat, the other pressing a blade to his ribs. The officer barely had time to gasp. Ethan's heart pounded. Damn it. I said I'd handle it. Rax's silver eyes locked onto his. No time. The kid whimpered, his whole body trembling. Please. Ethan exhaled. Knock him out. Not kill. A flicker of something crossed Rax's face. Disapproval? Amusement? Then whack. The officer crumpled as Rax struck a nerve cluster at the base of his skull. Ethan caught him before he hit the ground. Was that so hard? Rax said nothing. They moved toward the impounded ships. The stealth corvette sat at the far end of the bay, sleek and untouched. Almost too easy. A warning prickle ran up Ethan's spine. He slowed. Something was wrong. Rax noticed his hesitation. What is it? Ethan scanned the bay. We're not alone. The moment he said it, the lights flickered out. Darkness swallowed them whole. Then came the sound. A soft, deliberate footstep. Then another. Rax tensed. They're here. Ethan barely had time to reach for his gun before the first shadow moved. A figure materialized from the blackness. Tall, armored in sleek combat plating, moving with inhuman precision. Omega operative. Then another. And another. 3 of them. No words. No hesitation. The first lunged straight for Ethan. He barely dodged, bringing his pistol up, too slow. A metal-plated fist slammed into his ribs, sending him sprawling. His vision blurred from the impact. Rax was already in motion. She vanished from sight, then reappeared behind the second operative, her blade cutting clean through his throat. Blood sprayed across the hangar floor as the body crumpled. But the other two were faster. Smarter. They knew her. The remaining Omega assassins closed in on Rax, moving with the same deadly efficiency that she did. Their strikes were precise, their footwork flawless. They were trained to kill Xyrelians. Her own kind. Ethan struggled to his feet, gasping. He raised his gun, fired. One of the operatives twisted, dodging mid-shot. Impossible speed. The assassin closed the gap, slamming a knife toward Ethan's throat. A clang of metal. Rax intercepted, her blade locking against his. Their faces were inches apart, the Omega agent grinning. "You were our best," the assassin whispered to her. "And now you're just another target." Rax bared her teeth in something almost like a snarl. "I was never yours." Then she twisted, so fast Ethan barely saw it, and drove her blade straight into the operative's eye socket. The body hit the ground with a dull thud. The last Omega agent hesitated, realizing he was alone. Rax took a step toward him, her silver eyes glowing. The agent turned and ran. Ethan exhaled. Holy hell. Rax didn't even look winded. "We need to leave. Now." Ethan swallowed hard and stumbled toward the ship, his mind reeling. He had just seen a goddess of death in action, and he had no idea if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Ethan's hands flew across the ship's control panel as soon as they boarded. The stealth corvette was a beauty, dark matte plating, minimal thruster emissions, and a cockpit designed for quick getaways. Exactly what they needed. Rax stood behind him, her sharp eyes scanning the hangar doors. They won't give up. They'll have ships waiting outside. Ethan cursed under his breath. She was right. Omega never left loose ends. With a final keystroke, he bypassed the corvette's impound lock and powered up the engines. The ship hummed to life beneath them. "Hang on." Rax braced herself as Ethan slammed the throttle forward. The corvette lurched, lifting off the ground just as security sirens blared across the bay. Automated turrets swiveled, targeting them. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Rax." Before he could finish, she was already moving. In a blink, she reached the weapons console, fingers gliding over the interface. Twin plasma cannons roared to life. The turrets barely had a chance to fire before they were reduced to scrap. Ethan shot her a glance. "Good with ship weapons too?" Rax didn't even look at him. "Good with anything that kills." The hangar doors groaned open. Outside, the vastness of space stretched before them, endless black dotted with cold stars. But between them and freedom, a squadron of Omega interceptors waited like vultures. No escape. Rax exhaled slowly, studying the enemy formation. Then she turned to Ethan. "Get us into open space. I'll handle them." Ethan scoffed. "You planning to jump out there and kill them with a knife?" She didn't answer. She just moved. The ship shot forward. Ethan twisted through incoming fire, engines screaming against the void. Plasma blasts streaked past them, lighting up the darkness. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw Rax remove her cloak. Underneath, she wore a sleek Xyrelian combat suit, flexible yet armored. And across her back, a zero-G maneuver harness. Ethan's blood ran cold. "Tell me you're not." Rax grabbed a magnetic rifle from the weapons rack, pressed a control on her wrist, and the rear hatch slid open. Then she was gone. Ethan had seen soldiers use maneuver harnesses before. Small propulsion jets, perfect for quick bursts in space combat. He had never seen anyone use one like Rax. She launched herself straight into the enemy formation. Omega pilots barely had time to react before she was among them, moving like a phantom in the void. Her rifle barked, sending a high-velocity round straight through the cockpit of the nearest interceptor. No shields. No second chances. The ship exploded in a silent burst of fire. Rax twisted midair, dodging laser fire with impossible precision. Another ship lined up a shot. She kicked off the debris of the first explosion, spiraling toward them. One shot. A clean hole through the pilot's skull. Ethan, still piloting the corvette, could do nothing but watch as Rax dismantled the squadron single-handedly. The last remaining pilot, realizing what he was up against, veered away, retreating. Rax lifted her rifle, tracking him, then paused. Ethan held his breath. After a moment, she lowered the weapon. The pilot vanished into the black. Ethan blinked. She let him go. A second later, Rax activated her harness and shot back toward the Corvette. Ethan swung the ship around, matching her trajectory, and she landed with a graceful impact inside the cargo bay. The hatch sealed shut behind her. Ethan turned in his seat as she entered the cockpit, her breathing steady, movements controlled. She sat down across from him, expression unreadable. Ethan broke the silence. Why did you let him go? Rax's silver eyes flickered. Because fear is useful. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. What the hell had he just gotten himself into? Ethan set the ship on autopilot, letting the Corvette glide through the vast, empty void beyond Helios 3. His pulse was still racing. He had seen some insane things in his career, but watching Rax slaughter Omega pilots in open space like it was an art form, that was on another level. She sat across from him, as still as a statue, her combat suit barely scuffed. Ethan exhaled. All right, no more running. We talk. Rax didn't react. She simply waited. Ethan leaned forward. You were Omega's best. You could have killed Moreau, taken the payout, and vanished. Instead, you defected. What? Rax's fingers drummed against her knee, a slow, deliberate motion. Because the mission wasn't about Moreau. Ethan frowned. Explain. She reached into her suit and pulled out a small hollow chip. She slid it across the console. Ethan hesitated, then inserted it into the ship's terminal. A holographic briefing flickered to life. Text scrolled across the screen. Priority objective, termination of high-risk asset. Secondary objective, structural sabotage, Helios 3. Ethan's stomach dropped. Sabotage. Rax's expression remained impassive. Moreau was a distraction. Omega's real target was the station itself. Ethan's blood ran cold. They weren't just trying to kill him. They wanted to destroy Helios 3. Rax nodded. It's a strategic choke point. If the station falls, it destabilizes the entire sector. The resulting chaos gives Omega an opportunity to restructure. Ethan rubbed his temples. This wasn't just an assassination. It was an act of war. He met Rax's gaze. And you suddenly grew a conscience? Her silver eyes narrowed slightly. I grew tired of being used. Ethan scoffed. You expect me to believe that? Rax exhaled, standing. Believe what you want. But you know I'm telling the truth. And the worst part? She was right. Ethan had worked security long enough to know when someone was feeding him a lie. Rax wasn't. He leaned back. So what now? We can't exactly waltz back into Helios 3 and tell Moreau that Omega tried to kill him. Rax's voice was calm. No. We take the fight to them. Ethan laughed, shaking his head. Right. 2 people against an organization that controls half the galaxy's black ops. Sounds great. Rax tilted her head. You're not afraid. He sighed. No. I'm just not suicidal. She took a step closer. Then let me give you a reason to fight. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh, this should be good. Rax tapped the hollow chip again. A new file appeared. Ethan's eyes widened. Subject, Ethan Vance. Status, high-risk liability. Directive, termination approved. His own name. His own death order. A chill ran through him. They put a hit on me. Rax nodded. You helped me. That makes you a liability. They won't stop. Ethan stared at the file. Omega had already marked him for death. Whether he fought or ran, they would find him. His choices had just been reduced to one. He sighed, rubbing his face. I can't believe I'm saying this. Then he met Rax's gaze. All right, let's burn Omega to the ground. Rax wasted no time. She moved to the ship's database, pulling up a star chart. A red marker flickered over a distant system. Omega has a relay hub here. It's not their headquarters, but it's a critical node. If we take it out, we cut off their communications for half the sector. Ethan frowned. That's great, except we don't exactly have an army. Rax's lips curled slightly. We don't need an army. We need bait. Ethan folded his arms. I'm gonna regret asking, but what kind of bait? Rax turned the hollow chip between her fingers. Me. Ethan blinked. Come again. Rax tapped the terminal, pulling up a security overlay. Omega wants me dead more than anything. If I transmit a distress beacon using one of their own channels, they'll send their best to retrieve me. And while they're busy chasing ghosts, we infiltrate their relay hub. Ethan exhaled. You're insane. Rax tilted her head. That's why it will work. For the second time that day, Ethan questioned every life choice that had led him here. Then he grinned. Let's do it. The Corvette drifted in the shadow of a dying star, a lone speck in the endless void. Every light in the cockpit was dimmed, every system running at minimal power to avoid detection. The calm before the hunt. Ethan sat at the terminal, fingers hovering over the transmission controls. His gut told him this was suicide. His brain agreed. But here he was. Rax stood beside him, arms crossed, watching as he activated the relay. A soft beep confirmed the distress signal was live, piggybacking off a coded Omega directive frequency. Within seconds, the console flashed. A response. Ethan's stomach dropped. That fast. A flickering Omega encryption key appeared on screen. The enemy was already locking onto the signal's origin. He turned to Rax. They're biting. She nodded, unbothered. They think I'm running. They'll come. Ethan studied her. You sound awfully confident for someone who's about to be hunted. Rax's silver eyes gleamed. I was trained for this. Ethan clenched his jaw. Trained to be a perfect killer. Trained to never be caught. And yet, here she was, making herself the bait. The terminal beeped again. Incoming transmission. No video. No voice. Just a single, chilling message. // confirmed. Do not lose target. Operation Cinder engaged. // Ethan exhaled. Cinder? That sounds bad. Rax didn't react. They're sending their best. Ethan frowned. Define best. Rax finally turned to look at him. They don't send humans for this. The Omega warships arrived in under 10 minutes. 2 sleek, obsidian-colored frigates, their hulls nearly invisible against the void. No identification. No distress signals. Silent hunters. Ethan's grip on the flight controls tightened. Well, that's terrifying. Rax barely moved. They'll deploy operatives first. They don't expect to fight. Ethan's eyes flicked to the weapons console. They're going to be disappointed. The frigates loomed closer. Then, without warning, a breach pod detached from the lead vessel. Ethan cursed. They're boarding us. The pod latched onto the Corvette's lower hull, magnetic clamps locking in place. A dull thunk echoed through the ship. Then silence. Ethan pulled his pistol. How many? Rax closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her pupils had narrowed into razor-thin slits, Zyrelian night hunter vision activating. She exhaled. 4. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Just 4? They sent a boarding pod for only 4 guys. Rax turned to him. Not guys. The ship's internal alarms hissed to life. They were already inside. The first shot came from the dark. Ethan barely had time to move before a plasma round sizzled past his face, melting part of the console behind him. Shit. He dove for cover, rolling behind a supply crate. Then he saw them. The Omega operatives moved like shadows, too fast for humans. Their armor was matte black, their visors glowing faintly red. No wasted movement. No hesitation. Predators. Ethan squeezed the trigger, sending 3 rounds toward the closest one. All 3 missed. The operatives sidestepped them like he already knew where they'd go. What the hell? The answer came when the enemy spoke. Stand down, Rax. You cannot win. Ethan's blood went cold. The voice was wrong, metallic, hollow, inhuman. And then it clicked. These weren't just elite soldiers. They were Omega's experimentals. Rax moved first. 1 second, she was beside him. The next, she had vanished, materializing behind the nearest operative. Her blade flashed. The enemy caught it. Caught it. Ethan's stomach dropped. The operative twisted her wrist, forcing Rax's knife back toward her throat. For the first time since he'd met her, Rax looked genuinely surprised. Ethan didn't think. He fired. The bullet struck the operative's visor, shattering part of it. The Omega soldier didn't fall. Instead, he turned to Ethan and smiled. Half his face was missing. Metal plating gleamed beneath torn synthetic skin. A machine. Not quite human. Not quite anything. Ethan barely had time to react before the operative lunged. Rax moved first. She twisted free, plunging her blade directly into his exposed skull. This time, the body collapsed. But the others didn't hesitate. 3 left, and they were still coming. Ethan ducked as another plasma round seared past him. His gun was useless. These things were too damn fast. Rax was already engaging the second operative, their movements a blur. Steel clashed against reinforced limbs. The Omega soldier fought with precision, matching her move for move. Ethan had a terrible realization. Rax was fast, but they had been built to fight people like her. Ethan turned, catching sight of the third operative moving toward him. No weapons drawn, just a slow, deliberate walk, like a predator toying with its prey. Ethan's heartbeat pounded. He knew that look. He'd seen it before. On Rax. The Omega soldier was enjoying this. Ethan tightened his grip on his gun. I hate this job. Then he fired, and ran straight at the bastard. The shot struck armor, but barely slowed the operative down. Ethan didn't care. He hit the soldier's shoulder first, using momentum to drive them both into the bulkhead. The impact was like slamming into a wall. Ethan saw stars. The Omega soldier barely flinched. A hand closed around his throat. Ethan gagged as he was lifted off the ground. The operative tilted its head, studying him, like an animal deciding where to bite. This is it. Then, a gunshot. The pressure vanished. Ethan crashed to the floor, coughing. He looked up. Rax stood over him, one of the Omega soldier's own rifles in her hands. The operative lay motionless. Rax exhaled. Two left. Ethan groaned. You do this for fun? She smirked. Sometimes. Then, another shot. Ethan twisted. Too slow. Rax took the hit. Her body jerked, a searing plasma around tearing into her side. She staggered. The last Omega soldier charged. Ethan raised his gun and pulled the trigger. Ethan's shot found its mark. The last Omega operative stumbled. A smoking hole punched clean through its reinforced chest plating. But it didn't fall. It kept coming. Ethan barely had time to react before a fist slammed into his ribs, sending him crashing against the bulkhead. His lungs screamed for air as pain exploded through his torso. At least 2 ribs, maybe 3, cracked. The operative loomed over him, red visor glowing like a dying sun. It raised its weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. Rax moved. Despite the searing wound in her side, she launched herself forward. Her blade found the joint in the Omega soldier's armor, right beneath the armpit. A single, precise thrust. The operative froze. Then, a mechanical gurgle. Rax twisted the knife. The Omega soldier collapsed, motionless. Silence fell over the ship. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan groaned, rolling onto his side. I'm starting to think this plan sucked. Rax exhaled, pressing a hand to her wound. It worked. Ethan forced a smirk. You got shot. That's not working. She didn't respond. But the slight sway in her stance told him everything. She was losing blood fast. Ethan pushed himself up. Every breath hurt. Damn broken ribs. He stumbled toward the cockpit, slamming into the pilot's chair. A quick scan confirmed their status. The Omega frigates were still out there, waiting. They didn't know their operatives were dead yet. Ethan's mind raced. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before Omega realized something was wrong. He turned back to Rax. We need to leave. Now. Rax's silver eyes flickered. She looked at him, then at the dead Omega soldiers. She hesitated. No. Ethan's stomach twisted. What do you mean, no? She clenched her jaw, voice tight with pain. We have an opportunity. If we board the frigate, we can plant a worm in their network, access Omega's encrypted files. Ethan stared at her. You want to board an enemy warship while you're bleeding out? She didn't flinch. Yes. He dragged a hand down his face. You are insane. Rax's lips curled faintly. And yet you're still here. Ethan sighed. Damn it. The corvette's docking clamps latched onto the underside of the Omega frigate's secondary hangar. The connection was tenuous, one hard shake, and they'd be floating in space. Ethan checked his sidearm. One clip left. Rax, despite the wound, moved like a shadow. Her combat knife was sheathed at her thigh, her stolen Omega rifle slung across her back. She glanced at Ethan. Stay close. No shit. The airlock hissed open. They slipped inside. The interior of the frigate was sterile. Cold metal hallways stretched in every direction, lined with dim white lighting. No markings. No insignias. Like a ghost ship. Ethan exhaled. Creepy as hell. Rax ignored him, pressing a hand to the bulkhead. Feeling the vibrations. Listening. Then she pointed. Command deck. That way. Ethan didn't ask how she knew. He just followed. They moved fast, silent. Every corridor was empty. No patrols. No voices. Too easy. Too wrong. Ethan's gut twisted. Something's off. Rax agreed. Then, from ahead, a soft, deliberate sound. A footstep. They weren't alone. The command deck doors slid open. And there, waiting for them, a single figure. Not armored. Not armed. A man. Tall, lean, unbothered. His eyes, cold, silver like Rax's. Ethan's blood ran cold. The man smiled. Rax. Ethan's grip tightened on his gun. He knew her name. Rax didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Ethan had seen her fight Omega's monsters. He had seen her take a hit without flinching. But now, for the first time, she looked afraid. You. The man's smile widened. Did you really think you could run from us? Ethan raised his gun. Who the hell are you? The man didn't even look at him. He only watched Rax. You should have never left. Then he stepped forward. Rax's knife was in her hand in an instant. Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired. The bullet never hit. Because the man was already gone. Too fast. Then Ethan felt it, something cold against his throat. He barely processed it before the man was behind him. A whisper in his ear. Stay out of this, human. Rax moved, but the man was already gone again. A flicker of motion. Then a hard impact to the ribs. Ethan collapsed, gasping for air. Pain ripped through his chest. He hadn't even seen the hit. The man stood over him. Calm. Effortless. Unstoppable. Rax's voice, steady, but colder than Ethan had ever heard it. Zahir. The man, Zahir, smirked. I told you, sister. Ethan's vision blurred. Sister? Zahir crouched, looking him in the eye. You're bleeding internally. His voice was casual, like he was commenting on the weather. Ethan struggled to move, but he couldn't. The pain was drowning him. Zahir looked back at Rax. Come home, or I break him apart. Rax's knife tightened in her grip, and Ethan knew. This wasn't just another Omega agent. This was the one she ran from. This was the one she feared. And now, he had them both. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps. Every nerve in his body screamed in pain, but he forced himself to focus. Zahir stood over him, a predator toying with prey, his silver eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. You were never part of this, Zahir said smoothly. You should have walked away. Ethan clenched his jaw, struggling to move, but the pain in his ribs was too much. He wasn't going anywhere. Damn it. Across the room, Rax didn't move. Her grip on her knife was steady, but Ethan saw the tension in her stance, the slightest hesitation. The kind he had never seen from her before. Zahir tilted his head. You know what happens if you resist, sister. I kill him, then I drag you back to Omega in pieces. Ethan gritted his teeth. Sister. That word still rattled in his skull. She had never mentioned family. Not once. How deep did her past with Omega go? Rax exhaled, slowly. Then she met Zahir's gaze. You always talk too much. She moved. 1 second she was still, the next, she was a blur of motion. Her knife flashed, a silver arc aiming straight for Zahir's throat. But he was faster. Zahir dodged without effort, his movements so smooth it looked almost lazy. His arm shot out, catching Rax mid-strike, twisting her wrist, forcing the blade from her grip. The knife clattered to the floor. Ethan saw his opening. Ignoring the fire in his ribs, he lunged, reaching for his sidearm. Zahir was already there. A brutal kick sent Ethan crashing against the command console, knocking the breath from his lungs. Stars exploded in his vision. He barely registered Rax moving again. A savage strike to Zahir's ribs blocked. A lightning-fast counterpunch dodged. Zahir wasn't just fighting her. He was playing with her. Rax attacked with deadly efficiency, but Zahir was flawless, every movement calculated, every counter a lesson in absolute control. Ethan's vision blurred. His body screamed for him to stay down. But he knew one thing for certain. If he didn't do something, they were dead. Ethan's fingers fumbled against the console. His mind was hazy, but years of security work kicked in on instinct. Omega frigates had fail-safe protocols. Every ship had a self-destruct. He could barely see the controls, but he found them, his trembling fingers hovering over the panel. Zahir struck Rax again, sending her staggering backward. Blood dripped down her chin. His voice was calm. You're weaker than I remember. Rax wiped the blood from her mouth. And you're predictable. She pressed a control on her wrist. A beacon pinged. Ethan's stomach lurched. She had activated the Corvette's reactor overload. The whole damn ship was about to go up. Zahir frowned, for the first time actually surprised. Rax gave him a cold smile. Goodbye, brother. Then she grabbed Ethan and ran. They sprinted through the corridors, alarms blaring around them. The frigate's fail-safes were triggering. Ethan's legs barely worked. His ribs were shattered, his body a wreck. But he ran, because behind them, Zahir was following. They burst into the docking bay. The Corvette was still there, its engines hot and primed. Ethan nearly collapsed as they reached the airlock. Rax shoved him inside. Strap in. Ethan barely had time to throw himself into the co-pilot's chair before Rax hit the thrusters. The Corvette launched away from the frigate, just as the explosion erupted. A chain reaction ripped through the warship. Ethan watched the Omega frigate tear itself apart in a blinding inferno of light and debris. He let out a shaky breath. They did it. Then he felt her weight against him. He looked over. Rax was slumped forward. Blood pooled beneath her. The wound in her side. Too much blood. Ethan's mind went into overdrive. He had to keep her awake. Stay with me, Rax. We're not done yet. Her eyes flickered open barely. She exhaled softly. I'm tired of running. Ethan grabbed her wrist. Then we stop running. We finish this. She didn't answer. Her breathing was slowing. Ethan's chest tightened. He checked the NAV controls. They needed medical help. Fast. A single option flickered on the star chart. A backwater station, neutral ground, known for dealing with criminals. It wasn't much, but it was the only shot they had. Ethan set the course, gripping the flight controls. He glanced at Rax again. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked fragile. She had fought so hard, killed so many, survived Omega. And now? Now she was dying in a stolen ship, bleeding out in front of the only person who had ever fought beside her. Ethan's jaw tightened. Not today. Not like this. He pushed the engines to full throttle. The stars blurred into streaks of light. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning.